Hello friends, I'm Jade the Kobold, and these are my unfocused thoughts. Today we're going to be talking about some news. That's right, we have something that's actually up to date and informational. Because Nintendo, or more specifically a subsidy of Nintendo, not subsidy properly, but a studio that is working with Nintendo, got in trouble. Again. So, what happened? And what are we talking about? Well, as the topic says, we're talking about mods and mods for games. Which means, of course, we're going to have to define mods. But we're not going to do that right away. That's going to be like half the video. If you've seen this series before, you understand how that's going to go. Aspyr Media is in charge of porting some Star Wars games from their original consoles to the Nintendo Switch. They received a whole bunch of the original files, they received all the resources they needed, and they were probably the cheapest studio that was willing to do it. And they may have included content that was originally modded to the game. I will pull up some footage of it in just a moment. So, they say, Aspyr Media, I'm beginning to feel insulted. Nintendo Switch launched with just straight up all of my hero stuff from my mod, including the same glitches and bugs. We've data mined it, and it's the exact same files, just using the proper lightsaber and attack animations. Pre-patch. They had animations, they had models, and they had... they had their effects and their designs stolen. And the thing that's interesting about this more than anything else is that there were warning signs. To wit, Eagle-Eyed Modder spot something off with the Star Wars Battlefront. This was originally posted in February with screens of the pre-release of the trailer. This right here is how the character holds their lightsabers. You can see very clearly they have them both in the same hand, wielding them sort of like a nunchuck style. The mod puts them into a two-handed dual-wielding style. Very obvious. You can see right here as well. Yep. There it is. The mod changed this, and the company, who again, while they are not Nintendo, Nintendo is partially responsible for their actions, appears to have ripped the files. They have also verified that the... Where is it? Sorry, I'm just pulling up all the information just so I can give you all the relevant information right at the beginning, right? They also have a screenshot of some particle effects that they created, and every single console release of this had these mods. Now, they have since patched them out. They have added patches to disable them. The files are still in the game. The files that I Am a Shaman, who is the mod creator, made are still actually in the game itself. But they're disabled now. Is that enough? Is that good enough? I don't know, but let's talk about it. So, what is a mod? Well, a mod is a user-created patch for a game. That makes sense, right? Do I need a better definition than that? A mod is content made by third-party developers, unofficially, unlicensed, for the game. Now, modding has a long history. You can go back pretty much as far as you want in video games and find mods for games. Some of the earliest ones being in Doom, at least by popularity, though even before then there were mods for early pinball games, so you could add in custom pinball boards. And it's a good thing. It's a good sign, and it's actually very healthy for a game's ecosystem to have a happy and functioning modding scene. One of the reasons that Skyrim was so popular is because it was moddable. And, well, Bethesda never really pushed away the modding scene. They did try to kill the golden goose a couple times, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So, a mod is a third-party creation that is unlicensed and unofficial and unasked for by the original development team, created by fans. Is that a good definition? You know, I think let's work with that definition for now. Unlicensed is the interesting one. See, if you mod, let's say, the Master Sword into Minecraft. Someone's done this, I bet, I have to assume. If so, you mod the Master Sword into Minecraft. Nintendo has the digital rights to the Master Sword. Are you committing a crime? Arguably, yes. An important crime? No. A punishable crime? Not realistically. And a crime all the same? Technically, I think that you are committing some sort of copyright infringement. Or at least some sort of plagiarism. If you want to get more details on plagiarism as a concept, we did that in the last video. I'll have a link to that in the description. We talked about defining plagiarism and all the horrible and strange and wild hoops you have to jump through to get a solid definition of it. Because it's not easy. It's not cut and dry. Very few things in this life are. So, what did Asper Media do? They took a mod, and they published it. And, in the words of one of my game developer friends, of course they didn't do any vetting. The point was to make money off of third-party content, and if you spend labor on vetting, then you don't make as much money. And I think there is an aspect of that, an aspect of speed and cheapness for just moving files that just work into just effectively the AAA equivalent of an asset flip, right? Of taking the original game's assets and flipping them into a new port, into a new release. Porting is usually bad. Not always. There are some studios that do a really good job of porting. Capcom traditionally has been one of them. Monster Hunter ports for various consoles have been generally excellent. The world had some issues, admittedly, but many of the Resident Evil and Monster Hunter Rise and several other ports have been given a good and proper treatment so that they feel as if they were made for the console you're playing them on. If you play Elden Ring on PC, you don't feel like you're missing out on playing the game correctly, on playing the game in a way that makes sense. You don't feel like you're being a lesser player because of it. Though sometimes you are. Sometimes you can. I actually do have, in my possession... Let me see if I can pull it up. There we go. I actually do have in my possession this delightful little trinket. Because you see, Final Fantasy VII, that is a terrible picture. I can get a better resolution of that, probably. Final Fantasy VII, oh geez, that might be too big, was originally released on the PC as a port of the PlayStation version. And rather than give you any actual PC controls, rather than actually remapping everything for a keyboard in a reasonable WASD fashion in a way that made use of all the keyboard, they just slammed everything onto the keypad and just left it there and said, here, this is your controller, and we're going to include this little cutout to put over your number pad on your keyboard so that you can so you can have a reference for the buttons. It's actually extremely funny. That was a bad port. It was a port that didn't really keep the integrity and the design of the original. So, let's go back into mods. If you are making a mod for the game, it means you're passionate about the game. I said before that Skyrim's modding scene thrives, and the game was popular because, not in spite, but specifically because of the modding scene. Because the mods themselves brought life to the game. It was an old game pretty quickly. As much as we want to think about Skyrim fondly, it was mostly stuff we'd seen before, just really well presented. But mods kept players playing it over and over again. Rather than playing through the game one time and putting it down forever, people would load up a new character. And it wasn't just the base game that got them to do that. It was a new mod that changed something in the world to make it more entertaining. They added new magic spells. They added new enemies. They added new storylines. They added a new companion that walked along your side and was cute and that you could look at and snuggle. It was adding a new maps and new parts of the world, new content, #content, new outfits, new weapons, new everything. Made the game feel fresh. It made the game feel exciting. It made the game feel interesting. And I think that a lot of that is why Skyrim was as popular as it is. Now, you could mod the other games. Oblivion has some excellent mods that I'll be getting into later, one in particular. But these are mods that were created by individuals because they wanted them. Traditionally speaking, a company cannot acknowledge mods. Traditionally speaking, you cannot acknowledge the modding scene because then you will be taking a responsibility for it. And yes, Inigo is a delight. I love him. If you are modding, you are also taking... if you, as a developer, acknowledge the mods, then you have to question if you ever have any legal recourse to actually step in. And you don't want to, right? You want to let the modders mod. You want to let them cook. You want to let them create strange and wonderful things. So, who owns those creations? Yep, this is the crux of the question. We're finally getting to it, 20 minutes in. Who owns the mod? Well, the intellectual property of the game is, of course, owned by the publisher. The intellectual property of the mod that you made for the game is the property of the person who created that mod. The intellectual property that the mod uses may have someone else entirely. Again, if you may have added in Zelda's Master Sword into Minecraft, then you are using someone else's work entirely. The mod in question here, the one for Star Wars Battlefront, was a mod for the PS2 version. It was a mod for the PlayStation version that was made 15 years ago that reskins Ayla Secura, one of the characters in it, into Ventress, who is a different character entirely. And instead of actually porting over the original assets for Ventress from the Xbox and PC versions, yeah, it uses the mod. She has these moves not because she's actually Ventress, but a reskinned Secura. That's the answer for what happened. And someone made that because they thought that that would be a fun and engaging way to play the game. As I said, the mod makers can be the lifeblood of a game. So, they just copied and pasted them over. And I think this is important. I think the most important thing is this. They didn't give credit to the modder. Now, I could sit here and weave a fairly compelling argument that they have the right to use the modder's work. You could argue pretty well, pretty cleanly, that the modder's work for the game is a function of that game, and their work is effectively unpaid labor for that game. There's a strong argument there. I don't like that argument or agree with it, but I could make that argument pretty profoundly if I chose to. There is enough meat on that bone to make that comment. But that only works if you credit them, though. And, for the record, some awesome studios, Larian, people who did Baldur's Gate 3, who also did Divinity. Divinity Original Sin had some very good mods. One of those mods, I do not remember which one, I believe it was an auto-sorting in the bags, a function that still exists in Baldur's Gate, was made by a mod. And Larian actually reached out to the mod developer and said, "Hey, that's awesome! Can we incorporate that into the base game? Can we take your mod and make it official?" And the mod maker said, holy cow, yeah, sure. The mod became real. Was it not real beforehand? What was it if it wasn't real? It was some sort of limbo, some sort of ethereal creation, some sort of effectively fan art. I think that's honestly how you can best describe a mod legally, is as a type of programmed fan art. Does that make sense? Does that track? Well, what is a mod? Programmed fan art? It's third-party creation that is made for the passion of the game, for the audience of the game to enjoy. This all tracks with fan art. Are mods a form of fan art? Art doesn't have to be just pictures. Art can be videos, art can be music, art can be anything. We know that. Books can be art. Is a fanfic a piece of fan art? Absolutely. A fan fiction is absolutely a piece of fan art. A mod is a programmed piece of fan art. That description kind of works, doesn't it? But if we use that definition, does it hold true in some of these aspects? For it does change the source material. That's something that fan art doesn't do. That's something that most things don't do. It changes the source material into something new. Well, fan art doesn't do that, that's for sure. Fan art doesn't do even anything close to that. But a lot of the points of considering it like fan art do still apply. Well, okay. Maybe it's not fan art. Maybe it doesn't work like that. What about an unofficial patch? Fixing things that the developers forgot to fix before they shipped. It happens. It happens a lot, and many of the things that are fixed are either somewhere in between desperately needed and we didn't have time and it doesn't matter. You know? Finding a rock in the ground that should have been above the ground. Finding a door that just doesn't work when originally it had a location that it was supposed to teleport you to. Maybe it's not a plot important location, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe they just forgot to rig that door up and it's just a locked door from now on. Well, what if a mod fixes the lock on that door so it goes to the right place? They're changing the game. Now, does scale matter? Does it matter how much you change the game? Let's take a look at Skyrim again. Skyrim mods range anywhere from I'm going to put a funny face on the dragons so they look like Macho Man Randy Savage, which has no effect on anything else, which could be considered more like fan art. It changes one aspect of the game just visually. All the way down to effectively a complete rewriting of the base game. All the way down to completely overhauling the game into something new, into something unique, into something completely different. All the way to making Skyrim a game that takes place in another continent in Tamriel. There are mods that let you go into Blackmarsh, or Elsewhere, or Cyrodiil. Places that were never even imagined to be in the scope of Skyrim. Actually, Bruma was originally in the scope of Skyrim, but they cut it for... Anyways, that doesn't matter. So, is there a scaling point? Does making one of the outfits have a polo logo on the chest? Is that one thing and the overhaul is another? Is the scale different? Because both of them do change the base game. Are the patch fixes different than the overhauls? Because the patch fixes might just are doing minor things that you could argue were in the scope of the original game, or intended to be in the original game, but were left out or glitched in some way. Dark Souls has some situations like this where you can find extra content that is in the game files that was just never launched. Or maybe it was removed for a reason. Maybe that was intentionally removed because they didn't want it there, and that door is supposed to be closed. Maybe that door is supposed to stay closed. Maybe that door was never supposed to be opened in Bloodborne. Those who know. Maybe that is going against the design. And then we have the follow-up question. Does it matter? Does it matter if it's going with the original design or against it? if it's creating something new or changing a visual. Does the scale of the mod change its... what? Its definition as a mod? Its effect on the gaming industry? Does it change anything? From a legal standpoint, the answer is no, unless you're infringing on a third party's properties, like, again, Master Sword Minecraft. But that, even then, was mostly unregulated, because no one cares. No one cares. Except that everyone cares, and people care a lot about it, because it's incredibly interesting and incredibly valuable. Have you played Baldur's Gate? Have you played modded Baldur's Gate? I have... I wanted to play Baldur's Gate as vanilla as possible. Do you know how many mods I have for my vanilla Baldur's Gate? I'll tell you. I will tell you. I will pull it up right now, because in my vanilla first playthrough of Baldur's Gate that I wanted to have as unmodded as possible, I have 12 different mods installed. In my unmodded playthrough, I have 12 different mods installed. Why? When I intentionally didn't want to change that much of the game, why did I add these mods? Some are for convenience, more bags that make it easier to organize your inventory. Some are for gameplay reasons. There's a, I didn't want to play as, I wanted to play as a class that wasn't in the game, and someone modded in the Swashbuckler Rogue, exactly as it is in D&D 5th edition. And just copied it into and modded it into Baldur's Gate. Someone just made more dice. When you playing Baldur's Gate, you roll dice up pretty often, and someone added in a whole bunch more dice. Someone added in a mod that changes a plot point that happens partway through the game that changes your cosmetics and makes it so that it looks a little bit different. And one of them changes it so that a spell that you have to cast every 60 seconds is now a spell that lasts until you go to sleep. Long Rest Guidance is the best mod. Seriously, go install Long Rest Guidance. You will not regret it. So in my base game playthrough, I installed like a good dozen mods. Why? Is it because the base game wasn't good enough? Of course not. It's Baldur's Gate. The game's incredible. The game, straight out of the box, is phenomenal. Is it because there was just something that I didn't want? Well, yeah, there was just a couple minor tweaks here and there that would make my experience better. That would make my particular playthrough feel better for me. I customized the game. You see where I'm getting at? You see where I'm going with this? I'm leading up to something here. Do you follow? I customized the game experience to myself. I took the game and what the game is supposed to be and said, beautiful, fantastic, I love it. I haven't even played the game for more than an hour. It's a delight. But I think I might change a couple things in how you released it. Did I commit any crimes? Well, I don't think so. And again, Larian is a studio that has embraced modding and even made some mods canon. Made some mods actually official. So having a couple simple things, a improved UI, a extra hair pack, a couple more 5th edition spells implemented into the game makes it feel better for me. And by choosing some mods and not others, I can decide which mods fit me. But what happens when the studio says this mod is how you're supposed to play the game? Now, that's not what happened. That's not what happened, but I think it is absolutely worth consideration. It is worth talking about. What happens when... What happens when the mod is ripped? Now, before we go back to Aspir, I want to mention that this is not the first time in Nintendo products that this has happened. Oh no! there was a header. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this one because now we're getting into the weeds. On the NES, there is internal to the cartridge multiple boards. 1 second. There we are. Let's put it here. Inside of an NES cartridge, there are 2 chips, sometimes more. Sometimes there's actually a couple more chips that go up, depending on what features that game has, how much space the game has, how much content there is, how many assets there are will determine how many chips. And you need more if you want to add things like game saving. Then you need to add another chip for that and a battery. So some NES games are bigger than others. So, these 2 chips are distinct, and if you want to dump those chips into a ROM file, into a something that can play on an emulator, you have to link them, because by default they would dump as completely separate, file dumps. They'll be completely separate files, and you need to link them together if you want to play them in anything, even in the NES. So, an individual, whose name eludes me at the moment, made a system that adds a INES header in between the 2 chips, so that you have the one chip, a header file, and then the contents of the second dump. That is just how you do emulation for NES games. The official download of Super Mario Bros. That's right, it's just straight up Super Mario Bros., the original, for the Nintendo Switch, on the Nintendo Switch eShop, not on the eShop, but on the Nintendo Switch emulator for NES games, has an INES header, implying that either official Nintendo work downloaded a ROM from the internet and used it, or somehow convergently came up with the exact same method and the exact same thing and the exact same nomenclature and the exact same header in their launch. For the Nintendo Switch. Which do you think is easier for them to do? Which do you think is more likely for them to do? Which do you think is going to save them more money? Because that's the most likely answer. In general, the most likely answer is usually the one that saves the company money, because that's the one that the company is going to do. So, is it illegal to emulate? To make a ROM? Well, no. Technically, if you own the game, you can dump the game's files because you own the game. Is it illegal to have an emulator? Now we get into the next thing we're going to discuss. Because no, it is completely legal to own an emulator. In fact, this was even litigated in a US court, no less. Someone was making an emulator for the PlayStation and selling it. A for-profit emulator for the PlayStation. And it was determined in a court of law that they were allowed to make and sell that emulator, because that did not infringe on anything that Sony had done. Now, the company that was doing that was embroiled in a lawsuit, and that lawsuit put them under because they didn't have enough money to pay for it. So effectively, they still lost the lawsuit because the lawsuit drained their funds and they had to close shop. That's an abusive legal system. That's outside of the focus of this video. Question is, if emulation is legal, and emulators are legal, and dumping ROMs is legal, is it legal for Nintendo to use that dumped ROM in their own official release? someone else copied that ROM and made it playable. Is it legal? I don't know. I mean, they own the game, and the dump and the header, is that fan art? Using the definition of fan art that we came up with 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago? Is that fan art? I think it might be, in a sense. In a sense, that sense being that it is a mod, that sense being that that mod is taking the original work and modifying it slightly. The sense that Nintendo still owns that original work, and thus this derivative work, well, is not a breach of copyright, but it is a variation on the original work. On the original work that they still hold the license that they still own the rights to, that they still have control over, both creative and otherwise. I would again say that if you're using fan art, you should cite them, but that would make them look bad, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that make them look bad if they used that artwork and said, well, I mean, yeah, I guess it is, but we just used it anyways. I think that's the reason that Up Here removed the mod. Not because of any legal threat, but because it just made them look bad. Saying that they incorporated all of the credits of unpaid by a fan. By a fan who wanted to make the game better. By a fan who by all rights loves the game. That's why they did it, because they love the game. You don't mod something you don't love. You don't spend hours of your life creating fan art for something you don't like. You don't spend days of your life making unpaid labor unless you're passionate about it. So, this is a mod for the PS2. It was a mod for the PlayStation version of the game that reskins one character into another because they thought it would be cool to play that character in this game. Because they thought that it would be fun to play Ventress. I don't even know who Ventress is. I never played Battlefront, if I'm being honest. And she's a Clone Wars character, apparently. I never saw Clone Wars. Because they wanted to play a Clone Wars character in the PlayStation 2 version of Star Wars Battlefront. Could it have been an accident? I actually think that that's a very, very likely. I actually think it's extremely likely that this was a whoopsie. That someone took the files from their copy of Star Wars Battlefront and loaded it into their porting variation and worked out all the porting bugs, and then forgot that they had modded their game 12 years ago or whenever it was installed. Again, this mod was made 15 years ago. This mod is 15 years old. So, they didn't credit them. Is that the crime? Is that ethically the bad part? The fact that Aspyr Studios didn't credit the original author? Or does the author hold some ownership over the mod? Again, it's an unlicensed creation. How could they? Well, it's still their concept, it's still their work, it's still their design. Now we go back to talking about scope again. Is there artistry and creation in a mod? Of course there is. It is all artistry, it is all creation. Pardon me. Is there development time in a mod? Obviously, of course there is. Is there intellectual property rights in a mod? I don't know. Because the mod may or may not have intellectual property rights. because the intellectual property rights all go to the original person. But if you are, what about an overhaul? There is, for Oblivion, a mod that I have been dying to talk about, and it is called Oscuro's Oblivion Overhaul. It's a great mod. It adds so much. It adds a cloak slot to your character. It adds a whole bunch of items, thousands of items. It takes all of the items in the game and sorts them and rearranges them so that you have higher value cutlery in the higher class characters' rooms, and the lower class characters have wooden cutlery, because in the base game, everybody had the same cutlery in a medieval caste systems world. How does that make sense? Well, the mod said, you know what, we want this to be more reasonable, so that the richer the person you're stealing from, if you're playing a rogue character, or the richer the person whose home you're going into, it reflects in the design of the world. It takes so much of this into consideration, and says that this person's a guard, their salary would be 12 doubloons a month, and those doubloons would be, they would probably spend it doing this. They made so much iteration on the original work. They took all the development, they took all the thought, they took all of the work, and kept on going with it, and brought it to its logical conclusion, and said, hey, what if I added so much more to the world building that you started, but didn't finish? Did they not finish it? Or was that what they wanted? Why is this my finger changing? That's still my index finger. Is that the original? Is that completing the original work? By adding all this world building? Or did they want everybody to be using the same cutlery? Did they not want as big a disparity between the rich and the poor? Did they want the loot pools of these enemies to be the same? Or is it better? Is it better to have these mods? Is it better? Is it an improvement on the game to have such an impressive completion, apotheosis of world building, to take all this data and just refine it, polish it, and work through it until you have completed the world building that someone else started, and you are now claiming that you've completed it, and by which you are also claiming that it was incomplete beforehand. You are also in that same breath saying, you didn't finish your work. I did. Maybe it's supposed to be this way. Maybe all these additions are good. They make the game more realistic and more reasonable and more fun. They don't take anything away. Maybe the Master Sword is supposed to be in Minecraft. It's subjective, because what one person says will make no sense to somebody else. Maybe this big boob mod is not the original developer's intention. Imagine that! Maybe this mod that gives Aloy Gigunda honkers isn't part of the original developer's intention. It ruins the game. It doesn't add anything to the game. It destroys it. It takes away the original work. Or maybe it adds something that you wanted. Maybe it just changes it. Well, that makes it so much harder to put a value judgment on. How do we put a value judgment on this sort of subjectivity? Is it based on how much work is done? Well, how do you really quantify that? Someone could spend 300 hours making the world's most luscious breast mod, and it would still be wretched. Or someone could spend an hour modding in a fix to enable a green flame blade to actually have the correct animation, to enable long rest to work for a little bit longer, to enable a new class that the developers didn't add in. These changes don't have an easy answer, because some of them are loved and some of them are hated. Some of them are liked, some of them are not. Some of them are caught the original development team's eye, and some of them are completely ignored because they're absurd, because we don't have the rights to the Master Sword. Why would we add it to Minecraft? Why would you think that's a good idea? Why would you think it's a good idea? You'd think it's a good idea because it adds something that you want. Because you like Zelda and you like Minecraft. Because you like Aloy and you like... Anyways. And because you like the swashbuckler build for Rogue. And the original game... forgot it? Chose not to add it? Didn't have time to create it? Does it matter? Do these definitions matter? Does the amount of game design put into the mod matter? Because you have mods, like going back to Oscuro, that are overwhelmingly positive experiences. Oscuro's mod rebalances the entire leveling system. All the enemies in the game have a level scaling, but in default Oblivion, when you hit level 13, the bandits outside the starting city are upgraded to marauders who will be a level appropriate fight, because in that game at a base level, same as Skyrim, every fight is level appropriate. You can't get in trouble and find an enemy that's harder than you. You can't walk in the park and find an enemy that's easier for you, because the bandits level up with you, changing from bandits into, I forget the mid-tier, into marauders. And those marauders will be your level. They will be wearing a Daedric armor and glass weapons, because these marauders apparently have more money than the church in that game, and the churches in those games are pretty well loaded. So, the mod adds game design, adds more development time, in a sense, to the game by adding this extra design consideration, by having the rogues outside the starting town level with you from 1 to 5 and then stopping at level 5. And then saying at level 5, these little thieves will always be level 5. And later on, if you come back to them, you can punch them in the face and they will perish. That looked horrible on my tracking. And the Minotaurs in the Deep Forest, they start at level 18. They will level with you from level 18 to 27. But if you are level 7 and you find a Minotaur, that's a level 18 Minotaur, buddy. It's going to wipe the floor with you. It lets you get in trouble. But the original design didn't want to let you get in trouble. It goes against the original development design. Is it better? It's subjective. Does it being better matter? I think it does. That's why I've gone so long on this tangent, is because I want to think about it in this regard. It actually seems to me, be that the amount of goodness in a mod is somehow relevant? Is that true? Can it be true? Like, a part of me wants to say that it's true. Part of me wants to say that there's a genuine amount of effort going into the development of the Fallout 3 mod that adds requirements for water and radiation into the world is more important than Aloy's Big Boob mod. I feel like there's something important there. I feel like there is some sort of value judgment to be made. But by saying that, but by thinking that, but by even considering that, it requires a line to be drawn, and where that line is drawn is extremely rough, to the point where it might be better not to draw it at all. So, do the companies have the rights to their own games? Do the companies have the rights to your creations in their game? What if you make an original character? I alluded to Inigo earlier, and I want to bring that back up, because Inigo, which is a mod for Skyrim, adds a big ol' cutie patootie as a playable character, as a companion. This is Inigo. He is a good bean. He is a precious jelly bean of a cat who I will protect and who I will love. He has full-voiced dialogue. He has an entire set of quest lines devoted to him himself. And he has additional dialogue that helps the main quest. He has so much work and love and effort put into him, to the point where other modders will actually add in components about Inigo to their own mods to make sure that he has voice lines or that he has context about it. He is so popular and so loved that several other modders consider the effect that their mod will have on Inigo. How ridiculous is that? Isn't that absurd? Can we agree that that's absurd? This is a third-party creation, but it is still an original character. Original character do not steal, of course. It's a meme at this point. We all make fun of that, but it's still true. There's still something unique and creative that sparked this character that is so beloved, that is so well respected, and whose dialogue in many of the original game's cutscenes helps recontextualize that scene and make it better. In an interview in... what year was that? In an interview last year, 2023, Todd Howard himself said that the Inigo mod is awesome. His own words. He said, that mod is awesome. He loves it. Which implies that he's played with it. Which implies that he's used it. Which implies that he himself has gone through Inigo's questline, Inigo's exploits, and has given it his own thumbs up. Larian has taken the mods that have been made for Divinity and made them canon. And we have reason to think that they will for Baldur's Gate 3 as well. They add to the game. Or they can add to the game. They don't always. Is there a value judgment to be made? Is it right to place a value judgment on how good a mod is, to decide whether or not it can be stolen, it can be respected, it can be integrated into the game? Well, yes, I think that one has to be true. But what does that value judgment give you? What does that value judgment give you of comparing Inigo to, I don't know, this mod? I don't think Todd Howard is on record saying anything about this. I just googled this right now, and I honestly regret putting it on screen. But I still don't think Todd Howard has made any comments on it. Does that mean that this is worse? Does that mean that this is not at the same tier? Well, of course it is. It is absurd to think that it's not. No, not completely absurd. It's a value judgment. But is it a value judgment that has to be made? What does it mean to make a mod with intellectual property involved? What does it mean to make Inigo a part of Skyrim that is so well made that the original developer praises it? What would happen if Inigo was made canon? Now, this is the heart of the discussion, isn't it? Because, in effect, that's what Aspyr Media did. They took... pardon me. They took a Star Wars mod and made it canon. That is what this discussion is about. If you worked for Larian and you saw that bag mod and said, this is beautiful, I want this to be canon, and hey, can we make your mod canon? And you said yes. And they did. Wouldn't that be incredible? If you made a mod for Fallout 3 that added the requirements to eat and drink water and actually scavenge for food and water in the wasteland so that you felt like you were actually scavenging the wasteland, and they made it official in the next game and didn't credit you. Because that also happened. Fallout New Vegas adds these hardcore modes that require you to eat food, drink water, manage your sleep, so that you can feel that immersion of not just walking around in this world like a playscape, but actually having to say, oh no, I need food. I'm threatened. I need to go into the market because there's a supermarket over there that I know has raiders, but I need their food to survive. Think about how much that recontextualizes the game. Think about how much that changes. That is not just a mod that changes some visuals. That changes the core gameplay loop. That changes how you interact and how you see the game. And they added that in the next game. They didn't credit the original creator. Did they have to? It was a different game than that's not what the game that was mod for. The next game came out with that as a function of the base game, despite it originally being added by a modder. And do you know who worked on Fallout New Vegas? The gentleman who made Oscuro's Oblivion Overhaul was hired by Obsidian Studios because of their resume showing what they did to Oblivion. Let that sink in. That's true. That is a fact. The person who worked on Oscuro's... it was Joe Oscuro, I believe. I don't know if that's their actual name, but that was the tag they used online for a while. Who made Oscuro's Oblivion Overhaul, made this other games for Obsidian Studios. That modder got their job in no small part because of their mods. Because they made a mod that could be looked at and said, this is incredible, by designers, by other game designers, because that was not the same studio, that was not made by Bethesda, that was made by Obsidian. And they were hired by Obsidian, and their work was loved, respected. They took that as a sign of, well, skill, game design, prowess, whatever. It was good. There's no question that it was good. But is there an obligation to that team to credit the original mod for Fallout 3 that added those survival modes, that survival requirement? You can argue no and say no, of course there's not. It's a different game entirely. Why would they argue that? But it's still intellectual property. It's still thought. It's still development time. It's still an idea that franchise used, that was made by a individual who didn't make that game. Authors don't read fan fiction. In fact, most publishers will demand that an author not read fan fiction of their works, because there is a chance that when that author makes another work, they might subconsciously make something that uses a point from the fan fiction, that uses some plot thread, or that uses some idea from the fan fiction, and if they have read fan fiction, then they can be liable. That's right. They can be legally liable for taking somebody else's intellectual property and using it in their next book. Are mods fan art? This has been the question from the beginning. Is a mod a fan creation that is artistic? Is a mod fan art? Is a mod fan art? The author, I believe, could even be sued if they steal plot points if from fanfiction, if they take someone else's writing and plagiarize it, or even unintentionally take someone else's writing and use it as a source of inspiration, and use it as too much inspiration, enough inspiration that you can track it to who originally wrote it, who originally wrote that fanfic about the other creation, that unlicensed fanfic about somebody else's work. You see where I've been going this entire time? We finally got there. That is the question, because this crosses so many boundaries, and pardon me, and again, it's easy to think about this linearly and say, a mod is a mod is a mod. No, it's all connected. That's really like the core of this entire series, right? Of the connection between different parts, between different ideas, between different concepts. Is a mod fan art? If you take fan art and turn it into your book, can you be held legally liable? If you turn your fanfiction into a book, you can be accused of stealing a fan's ideas. If you steal a fan's idea, then there is a bit of legal question. Does that a question apply to mods? What if Inigo shows up in Elder Scrolls 6? What if Inigo shows up as an official character in Elder Scrolls 6 the way that the survival system shows up in Fallout New Vegas? What if Inigo shows up in Elder Scrolls 6 uncredited? Let's take it one step back. What if Maik references Inigo? Maik is a character in Elder Scrolls games who's breaks the fourth wall. Maik talks about things outside of the games. Maik has a bunch of lines of dialogue that are all related to meta information. Maik does not understand what is so impressive about shouting. Maik can shout whenever he wants, is a reference to the dragon shouts in Skyrim. Why do soldiers bother with target practice? One learns best by hitting real people, is a reference to the skill leveling system in which you must hit combat targets to gain experiences, where hitting a dummy does not actually level things up. Where are bears? Where are bears? Men that are bears? One of the lines in the original reference to Skyrim in Daggerfall, one of the other games, says that most were creatures in Skyrim are were-bears. Something they retconned because they wanted werewolves in Skyrim. So he references that other work. But. Where is it? Hold on a second. Let me find it. I don't know if I can find it. There is also references that he makes outside of Oblivion. There's references he makes to the forums. There's references that he makes to other properties, other intellectual properties. If he references Inigo, what does that mean? Does that mean anything interesting? I think it has to. I think it has to. Does that mean anything relevant to this conversation? I have no idea. But the conversation is about intellectual rights and crediting them. Aspyr Media included a mod in their port Did they have the right? I think they did. They took it offline, and this is already, to clarify, it's already gone. If you look if you actually have the Battlefront collection, whatever that is, the Star Wars collection that includes Battlefront, it's gone. They've removed it. The DAT files are still there. The files that are still there. The DAT files are still there. The files that were made by someone else are still on your console, on your Nintendo Switch. The files made by Shaman are still on your system. Just disabled. Because they weren't supposed to be enabled. Or maybe they were. Maybe they were initially, because it looks better. And they thought they would just do that and no one would care. But the modders noticed it right away. Because it's their passion. Because they were passionate for it. Because they loved it. Because it was their creation that they made. Because they loved the game. They saw it right away. I can't tell you if Aspyr did that intentionally or unintentionally. That's not my place to say. I don't work at Aspyr. I do know that they flip games. I do know that they are one of the cheaper porting studios that's available for that type of porting, and they have a good reputation for it overall. As I understand it, Aspyr Media has done several of these flips that are actually quite good. These ports. I can't tell you if they thought it was a good idea to add, or if they said, whoopsie doodle, I had that mod installed and forgot when I started the porting process. But isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that wild to think? Isn't it crazy to look at that and say, whoopsie, I accidentally did a plagiarism, I accidentally stole someone else's work, I accidentally took somebody else's fan art and put it in the game? I've used someone else's fan art as a thumbnail. I didn't notice it. I thought it was original. I thought it was official art. And they told me later that yeah, Kotaku used the same artwork as well, and thinking it was official art. It was just phenomenally good art, and they called me out on it. So they said I could use it, but just reference them. So I did. That's what I did. That's how I handled it. Kotaku didn't. Kotaku ignored them and used their art, and their art is still in that article. Their fan art. Their fan art that they made because they loved the game. If you're curious, hold on, I'll find it real quick. Oh my goodness, that's old. Here, it's this one. That artwork for Chicory was just pixel fan art, which I didn't know when I used it, and so neither did Kotaku, and neither one of us really thought to check. Did Aspyr just forget to check? Did they forget to check if that was official or if that was fan art? Are mods fan art? We've established they are. We've established that mods are a type of fan art. Haven't we? Are we all in agreement on that? Do we still agree that fan art, as it's defined, applies to mods? Is there any definition of fan art that doesn't hold true to that, or is that wrong? Because if that's right, if that's true, if that is accurate, then where is the line drawn? When is it okay for an author to read fanfic and incorporate a fan's work? When is it okay for a company to use the fan art in lieu of official promotional pieces? When is it okay for a company to steal an idea like the survival system? When is it okay to make a mod official? And does it have to be credited? Does it have to be credited? Does it have to be credited? Ethically, it has to be. Ethically, you absolutely has to be. If you make something that is a part of a big production game, you should be credited for your work. If you do anything to work on a major release, you should have your name in it. Or a minor release. Or no release, maybe even. Does the size and quality of the fan art determine how relevant it is to cite? Do I need to cite all fan art that's used, the good and the bad, or is it okay if it's bad? Is it okay if it's small? If it's just a little tweak that I just implemented into the game? Is it okay if it's an ego? Is it okay if it's a huge, sweeping overhaul system? Is it okay if it rebalances the entire game and you step back and say, I like that, I'm going to use that idea? At what point is that your idea? It's somebody else's idea, but if you are working on a new project, that could be just an inspiration. Why, the new game isn't the same game. The new project isn't the same intellectual property. You made that mod for this game. Now we're making this game over here. It's different. And I don't need to credit you at all. Is that true? Is that ethical? Is that okay? Is that okay? Well, it is a different project. It's a completely different project. Why would you bother crediting someone? Would every single platformer need to credit Mario? Would Mario need to credit Jumpman for the Commodore 64? Would Jumpman need to credit the idea of jumping on a rock and climbing a ladder and jumping over a bullet that's shooting at you and picking up a flower and collecting 6 flowers per level so you can go to the next level? Is that all things you need to credit? You do not need to credit those. Why? Or rather, when? When do you need to credit it? Is it a value judgment? Is it based on how good it is? Well, platforming doesn't need to credit Mario. Does survival systems need to credit the person who made the survival system in another game? Do you need to credit the idea of surviving in the wilderness? Do you need to credit the person who made the same system in the last game? Do you need to credit Inigo? Do you need to credit Ventress? Do you need to credit anything? Everything? At what point does it matter? Is it a question of scale? There was an author. I don't remember who it was. It might have been Robin Hobb. There was an author who was accused of stealing fanfiction work because the book had a very similar plotline to a very popular fanfic. And that author claimed they had never read the fanfiction. They had no idea what you were talking about. This is their new book, and they made it themselves, and they have never read any fanfiction. Because they didn't want to chance stealing something. Instead of stealing something, they convergently designed someone else's work and incorporated it into their own work completely separately from the other creator. There was no need to cite because it wasn't there at all. There wasn't anything to cite because it was their work. But it wasn't the first person to have that idea. Does it matter who had it first? Can you patent a concept? Of course not. It's just an idea. It's just an idea, bro. There's no way you can patent that. But we're not talking legal, we're talking ethics, remember. The question is it relevant at all that a fanfic maker made that? Maybe they just wanted a survival system, and the only way that makes sense to make a survival system in the Fallout world is to make food give you food, to make water give you water, to make sleep lower your tiredness. Maybe that's just the only way to do it. And the original mod maker just did that. And maybe Nintendo just added a header file between the two parts of the ROM that just happened to be the same as the downloadable version of it. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe that was completely random. Maybe They just happened to make some changes that changed Ayla into Ventress. They didn't make that argument. It would have been insane for them to make that argument. They just quietly shuffled out a patch that deleted and undid the work. I am not giving them the benefit of the doubt here. I am simply saying that if we take this situation into account and look at other situations, there is a benefit of the doubt to be taken sometimes. When is it there? Is it when it's the only reasonable path? Was it the only reasonable idea that you can have to make an idea come to light? Is it reasonable to add the level of world building that Oscuro did and actually level scale all the loot boxes depending on the station of the person who lives in that home? No, Dishonored does that. Did they steal it from Oscuro? Of course not. Maybe they did. It's a basic concept. It's a basic idea. It's just Mario. It's a platformer. You don't need to credit a platformer. It's just an idea. It's just an idea. When do you need to credit an idea? When do you need to credit an idea? Do you need to credit it? Is it depending on how good the idea is? Now we're back onto this value judgment. You see? It all comes around. It all flows together. Is there a value judgment that is relevant to the need to credit? Do you need to credit the person who came up with Inigo, but not the person who came up with the big boobs mod for Skyrim? Do you need to credit the person who came up with this survival system for Fallout, but not the person who added the Master Sword to Minecraft? Is there a value judgment to be made? When do you have to do that? When is that value judgment worth considering? Is it ever worth considering? At what point it has to be? At some point it has to be, right? At some point there has to be a relevant question of, is this good enough? Is this important enough? Now that's a new angle, isn't it? How do we define important? Well, giving a character big boobs, is that important? No, it's just a visual thing. It's fine. Is rebuilding the entire combat system from the ground up to change the way stamina works important? What rebuilds the entire game? Of course that's important. Where's the line to be drawn? What mods are important enough to be credited if you decide as a developer that you want them? Which mods are important enough to be credited by the developer if they are implemented? Or maybe just their inspiration. At what point is it actually relevant to cite your inspirations? Ooh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I get inspiration from everywhere. I get inspiration from all over the place. I can't track everything I get inspired by. I don't write down everything that gives me inspiration. Should I? I'm gonna be right back. Give me 1 second here. That didn't work. Okay, you're gonna see two of me for a second. Deal with it. Sorry about that. So, where were we? Let's go back to Baldur's Gate. Because I think there's still a lesson to be learned there. I think there's several lessons to be learned there. But on the modding front, do you need to credit? What happens? What happens when they add Swashbuckler? If Baldur's Gate adds a patch, adds a DLC, as they almost certainly will, as they almost inevitably will, as they're almost guaranteed to do, what happens if they use the same files as the people who made mods? Ooh, that's a fun question, isn't it? What happens then? Because neither of them actually are the original authors. The mod just adds a one-to-one recreation of the content on the tabletop game. That's all. It's the tabletop game content that's being copied over. It's not owned. It's not sourced. It's not created by Larian or by the mod maker. It's neither one of them own the Master Sword in Minecraft. No, this is different because Larian actually does have the license for it, but I'm just making a callback deal with. Okay, anyways. If the mods are taken as is and uncredited, and Larian would not do this, to clarify. If are uncredited, that would be bad? Do we agree that would be bad because they're taking the creations of somebody else's work and making them official in their game and making someone else's work uncredited in their game? Is that bad? I think it's bad. I think it's bad. What if they just make it the same thing? Because that is a established subclass for the rogue class. There is an artificer class in D&D. There is a spells subclasses. All these things already exist in D&D. If Larian adds them, as they almost certainly will in a DLC, and it functions exactly like the mod, did they get their idea from the fanfic writer? Are mods fanfics? Are we with their fan art? Does that matter? Is that a question that's worth asking? It is a question that's worth asking because we've seen it in these other fields. The author sourcing their ideas from fanfic, bad, possibly could get them in legal trouble. The game designer sourcing their ideas from the last game's mods, is that okay? Do we accept that? The game designer sourcing their ideas from the current game's mods, wait, that might be a little bit there. The game designer sourcing their ideas from someone else entirely. Well, that's fine. Who all mod maker also sourced their ideas from? Is there an overlap there? Is there some point where that becomes an overlap? Is there some point where we need to worry about that? Why do we need to worry about that? Why do we need to worry about that? What about that is worrisome? Because it's fanfic. It's fan art. It's somebody writing code because they love a game. It's fan art for the game. It's fan art, fan creations, fan works that have been made for this game, unlicensed. Let's flip the script. Let's turn everything on its head and go the exact opposite direction. What if a mod maker makes their mod into its own game? This has happened. It's happened several times. In fact, I can even point to one of them on Steam right now. Right now, I can go to Steam, Store, search The Forgotten City. The Forgotten City was a mod for Skyrim. the Forgotten City takes a mod for Skyrim and says, what if this was its own game? They made the mod. They took the mod that they made, they ripped it out of Skyrim and made it into their own game, because making a game nowadays, I've said this several times, making a game nowadays is about as difficult as making a mod used to be. There's so many tools and so many resources and so many ways of going about it. This mod maker made a wonderful, well-recognized, well-respected, well-loved mod for Skyrim called The Forgotten City. I played it, I loved it, it's a delight. And then they said, this doesn't deserve to be a mod. This deserves to be its own game. What do they owe to Bethesda? Do they need to cite Skyrim as in their credits? Do they need to say this was made under the framework of Skyrim, with Skyrim franchises, with Skyrim characters, with Skyrim factions that we rewrote in order to make it our own game? This was a mod, but now it's no longer. Now it has evolved. It has grown an intellectual property of its own, if you will. Or if you won't. It has become its own thing, and apparently it's on sale right now. Hold on, I'm gonna buy this, because this has been in my wish list for like multiple years, and it's currently at 60% off. Hold on. I'm gonna... Oh wait, no, it says I already own this game. I bought that? Oh, I never played it. Oh yeah, there it is. It's actually in my Steam library. Yeah, cool, I can install that. Because I never played that, actually. I only played the mod for Skyrim. But when I saw that they made their own game, I wanted to pay for it to support them. I wanted to give them the $15 to say, you know what? This was such a good mod, it deserved to be its own game. This was such a good mod for Skyrim that used Skyrim assets and Skyrim characters and Skyrim factions and Skyrim world building, that they took it out of Skyrim and made it their own game. It's the same question, isn't it? It's the exact same question, except that the mod maker is now the game designer. They took their concepts and brought it with them. "50 Shades of Grey" is fanfic. I think this is pretty well known at this point. I think it's probably extremely well known. 50 Shades of Grey was a Twilight fanfiction. But they spun it off and they made it their own thing. They took their fanfic and made it into something real. They had the right to. They had the ability to. They absolutely used inspiration and themes and characters with different names from the original work, from the source material that is no longer a fanfic, that's no longer a mod, that's no longer fan art, that is now a new source material, that is now a new intellectual property, that is now its own thing. Where do we draw that line? When do we draw that? Do we have to draw that line? Is it okay for it to be completely different? Is it acceptable to us as a community to just toss that over our shoulder and say, yeah, whatever? It probably is, but it's still worth talking about. It's still worth considering. To me, the question is not one of legality, that is, or it's a question of ethics. It's a question of what's right, of who deserves credit, of who deserves to have their name in a credit. If Aspyr contacted Shaman and said, hey, can we use your mod in the port? They probably would have said yes if they got their names in the credit. They don't have their names in the credit, though, and I think that's where the biggest problem, the biggest concern, the biggest holdup for this entire situation is not having those names in the credits. We come back to respect. It's about respect for the mod creator. It's about respect for the people who you are taking credit from, who you're taking inspiration from, who you're taking design from. But what needs credits? How much work? How important? How do you define important? What is important enough to justify credits? What if they add the Master Sword to Minecraft? Should they credit the modder who did it first? What if the author writes a book that follows the same plotline of a fanfic that they acknowledge that they read and liked? What happens if Inigo is in Redfall? Redfall? Is it Redguard? Skyrim, the next Elder Scrolls game. What happens if Inigo gets his own game? What happens then, indeed? Because there's so much work, so much love, so much craft, so much effort, so much quality. Is quality important? We never decided that. What happens if Inigo spins off into a new open world RPG? Do they need to cite Elder Scrolls? Do they need to cite? Do they need to put Todd Howard's in their bloody credits because their character wouldn't exist without the Elder Scrolls V? Or does it matter? And if it doesn't matter, then when does it matter? Because we've all decided it does at some point. We've all decided that there is some threshold where it matters, where we care, where it becomes the most important thing in the world that this theft happened. But where is that line? Because it changes from person to person. It changes from value to value. What's high value mod for one person is a low value mod for someone else. And what should have been in the game for one person is a terrible, stupid addition to somebody else. What happens if the Master Sword becomes canon in Minecraft? What happens then? Thank you all for joining me. This has been completely unhinged, unfocused ramblings for the past 90 minutes, in which I have effectively said nothing. If you enjoy this content, please leave a like, please subscribe to the video, please leave a comment telling me what you think, because I raised a lot of points here. I raised a lot here, and I think that much of it is worth considering and worth thinking about and worth mulling over. And I want you to do that. I want this to be a jumping off point. I want this to be the start of a discussion in the comments section. And I'm not kidding. I'll be there. I'll be giving more thoughts and more considerations. I want this to be important. I want to be important. And I'm working on it. And I know that you're working on yourself too, because it shows. You're doing a great job. I see how hard you're working. And I'm sorry that things are so hard. But you deserve better. And you'll get there. Better is on its way to you. Please believe that. Good night, friends. I love you.